Hi everyone. So today I'll be discussing with you the three regions of our state of North Carolina and what makes each of them unique. You should have your graphic organizer in front of you ready to take notes, and that graphic organizer is available on Schoology. Remember, I will be taking these notes up for a grade this week. To start, let's do a little quick review of where North Carolina is in relation to other states. North Carolina is located in the southeast region of the United States, and it's bordered by Tennessee over here to the west, Georgia and South Carolina in the south, the Atlantic Ocean to the east, and Virginia to the north. North Carolina has three unique regions: the mountains, the piedmont, and the coastal plains. Each region has a unique physical geography and landforms. Starting with the coastal plain over here, it's located on the far eastern part of the state, as you can see highlighted in blue here. This region includes the barrier islands that we call the Outer Banks, and goes all the way in to where this green point starts. So then this green area is called the Piedmont. It's located in the middle of the state between two other regions. And then our last region is over here in orange, which is the mountains, and that is located in the far western part of our state. This next map allows us to take a closer look to see which counties are located in each region. When we locate Beaufort County, we can see that we are located in the coastal plain region of our state. As I mentioned just a minute ago, each region is unique in the landforms that it has. That's what makes it a distinct region from the others. So I want to go over really quickly what landforms each has. So starting with the coastal plain, this is a relatively flat area. So if you notice, you look around in our region, you're not going to see a whole lot of hills and definitely not any mountains. It's mostly flat, and it's also low in elevation, meaning that it's really close to sea level. The Piedmont is much hillier than the coastal plain, and is at a higher elevation, but it also has a flat area known as the Piedmont Plateau, which is just a flat area of higher elevation. And then lastly, we have the mountains, which are the highest in elevation in the whole state, and it also includes several mountain ranges, which are all part of the Appalachian Mountains. So next I'm going to be talking about each region in a bit more detail. The first is the coastal plain, and we can actually divide the coastal plain into two sections. So there's an outer coastal plain and an inner coastal plain. So you can see the outer coastal plain here in blue, and you can see the inner coastal plain here in green. So the outer coastal plain includes the tidewater region, which is in here, and then the Outer Banks, which, like I mentioned, are these islands out here. This whole region, again, is low elevation, relatively flat, and close to sea level. So to break this down, let's talk about the Outer Banks first. So like I mentioned, Outer Banks are a strip of barrier islands that stretch about 175 miles. So this is a pretty long stretch of islands here. And these islands are unique in that they divide the Atlantic Ocean from the mainland area, and they also have their own interesting set of landforms. So one landform that you can find in the Outer Banks are capes, and capes are just strips of land that stick out into the water, and this is a lot of times where we find lighthouses. And the reason for that is that these little strips of land were often what ships would hit in the water and would cause shipwrecks or for ships to sink. So one of the most well-known ones is Cape Hatteras, which is known as the graveyard of the Atlantic for this reason. It has been the site of many, many shipwrecks over the years. And on the right here, I've included a map that shows you the location and the names of some shipwrecks out on our Outer Banks. So you can see there have been a lot, And that's why a lot of these lighthouses were put into place to try to prevent these from continuing to happen. Next is the tidewater. So again, this is still a coastal area, but it's not those islands, those barrier islands. It's not the Outer Banks. It's a little bit more inland, but it's still our coast. So it's an area along the coast, still close to sea level, still flat. Um, and pretty much one thing that you need to know about the tidewater area is that since it is close to sea level, it does tend to flood easily, and there is water everywhere. And so that's something we notice right here in our town is that we have the river, and so whether it's rivers or swamps or sounds or wetlands, there's just water all throughout this area. Here in Washington, we also have what's called an estuary, which is an area where salt and fresh water mix together. And this is an important area for marine life because the little baby animals are able to be born and live the first part of their life in the estuary before they head out into the larger bodies of water. One dominant feature of the Tidewater area is that it is pretty swampy. There are a lot of swamps, and this includes the Great Dismal Swamp. And the swamps are home to many, many types of plant and animal life, which include the Venus flytrap, which I think is pretty cool. Moving on to the intercoastal plain, this area of the coastal plain is different than the outer coastal plain because instead of being more beachy and having these sand dunes and all that, you actually see soil that is really, really good for farming. So the soil is still sandy, but it also has a lot of nutrients in it, which make it great for farming. And this area is also a little drier and higher elevation than the outer coastal plain. So when you start heading inland a little bit here to the intercoastal plain, it's less likely to flood. You see a little bit less water, and the soil is really, really good. One part of the intercoastal plain that's interesting is this area called the Sand Hills, and that is an area pretty much of leftover sand dunes from ancient times before our whole geography changed. So if we were to look back a super, super, super long time ago, this is kind of where the beach would have been. The coastal plain is home to several major cities, including Fayetteville, Greenville, Jacksonville, Rocky Mount, and Wilmington. There are also several colleges and universities, with the largest being East Carolina University right down the road and UNC Wilmington. Since there's really good soil, like I mentioned, in the coastal plain, agriculture is pretty huge. A large variety of crops can be grown in this area, and there's also a lot of livestock farming. With so much water being everywhere, it makes sense that fishing is also a common occupation for people and also a hobby. So we all know people who just enjoy fishing for fun, but there's also a lot of people who make their living from fishing as well. Additionally, the coastal plain is also a hot spot for military bases, including Fort Bragg and Camp Lejeune, making the military a very large employer in this region. And lastly, since there's so much natural beauty, including the beaches, it's no surprise that this area of the state attracts a lot of tourists. Moving on to our next region, we'll be discussing the Piedmont. Remember, the Piedmont is the area located in the very middle of our state. In this region, the soil changes color, becoming red, and it starts to contain a lot more clay rather than sand. The Piedmont is also much more hilly than the coastal plain. So instead of it being flat, you will see some hills, and some areas are actually pretty steep hills. There is a line that separates the Piedmont and the coastal plain, known as the fall line, and at this line, water falls down from the higher elevation to the lower elevation. The Piedmont is home to our state's largest cities, which include Charlotte, Raleigh, and Durham. And along these same lines, there's also many universities located in this area. So UNC Chapel Hill, NC State, Duke, Wake Forest, and many, many more. So this area is home to a lot of higher education. The Piedmont is also widely considered the economic center of our state, and this makes sense when you consider that our largest cities are in this area. Some industries, such as manufacturing, banking, and technology, have done really well in this region. We also have NASCAR in Charlotte, which is really cool. And lastly, there is the Research Triangle Park, which is the area here on the map between Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, which is a hub for technology innovation. Lastly, we reach the mountains, which are in the far western part of the state. Geographically, this region is smaller than the other two, but it makes up for it with all that it has to offer. If you've ever been to the mountains, you know what I mean. The mountains in North Carolina contain the highest point east of the Mississippi, which is Mount Mitchell, so that's really awesome. If you're into hiking or climbing or any of those things, our state is a great place to do it. And this area is much, much higher in elevation than the other parts of the state. So as you head west, our elevation just gets higher and higher and higher. The mountains are obviously a great place for scenery as well. We have the Blue Ridge Parkway, and then, like I mentioned earlier, the Appalachian Mountains. And last thing to mention here is the New River, which is located in this region, is actually the second oldest river in the entire world after the Nile River. So again, another cool fact about our state. In the mountain region, major cities include Asheville, Hickory, and Boone, and this area is continuing to grow. There are 3 universities located in this region, which include Appalachian State, UNC Asheville, and Western Carolina University. And the mountain region thrives on tourism, which, if you've ever been, totally makes sense. There's lots of hotels, there's lots of cool things to see. So the area really does depend a lot on the tourism that the natural scenery brings. But there's also a lot of agriculture in this area as well, including livestock. And one of the coolest things is the Christmas tree industry in the mountains. Thank you guys for watching this video lesson. Please let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them, and I hope this was interesting. Thank you.